Hello everyone, I'm Ita, and today I would like to present you about the first reading that was written by Professor Kim with the title, The Military Junta, A Quest for Legitimacy and Control. Basically, this reading mainly talks about the development of Korea under the military regime that was led by Park Chung-hee from the early 1960s until he was assassinated in 1979. The reading was contained by several parts: the introduction, a question of legitimacy, administrative democracy, Park's technocracy, guided capitalism and the first five-year plan, chaebol training, leadership challenge, dependence on U.S. aid, anti-flunkyism rhetoric in presidential campaign, and conclusion. Park Chung-hee was born on November 4th, 1917 in Gumi, Gyeongbuk Province in South Korea. He was a graduate of teacher school, and for a short period of time he taught in an elementary school, and then after that he joined the Manchurian Military Cadet School. He had a very amazing and excellent military background. He graduated from Japanese Military Academy, and then he also graduated of Korea Military Academy, and then he being a major general and led the 1961 military coup, and finally he became president from 1963 to 1979, while he was assassinated in October at the same year. The first part of the reading is the introduction, but basically introduction part is just an overview of the reading. It talks about Park's way to sought for international legitimacy, Park's Koreanized democracy, or also known as administrative democracy, that I will explain in the next part. The next one is Park's new bureaucracy, Park's most serious challenge, and also anti-flunkyism that I will describe in the other parts of the reading. Moving swiftly on to the second part of the reading, it is a question of legitimacy. In 1961, actually, Park's military career is supposed to end. However, at the same time, the political condition and economic condition in Korea was very unstable and also very chaotic. Therefore, Park claimed to have disregarded of the peril to my life and finally led the military coup of 1961. But he saw his mission as somehow finding a solution to prevailing socio-political and economic chaos, and also ultimately removing the communist threat from North Korea. He also claimed that his revolutionary tasks were also to eliminate corruption and eradicate other social evils, inculcate a fresh and wholesome moral and mental attitude among the Korean people. There are also the objectives of the COPE, or also known the 6 pledges. The first one is anti-communism. The second one is strengthening international relations. Third one is anti-corruption. Next one is economic reconstruction, unification, and the last one is returning power to civilian government. Park's military regime and anti-communist policy was very influenced by his past, when he was associated by having a connection with the communist. And also, anti-communist and economic development are inseparable in Park's view. And then the military coup is the only means to save the nation and the people, and he kept portraying the military regime as a defender of democracy and freedom, while in the reality, it is the opposite of it. The first thing that he did was consolidating power, both from populace and international community, especially the U.S., since the U.S. had a very significant influence and Korea was very dependent on the U.S. And also, he did what he called as a cleanup operation, what basically is restructuring the state and dismantling of democratic political structure, when he basically recruiting new people to the government and eradicating corruption. As I have mentioned before, Korea at the time was very dependent on the U.S. In fact, the U.S. financed 50% of national budget of Korea and 72.4% of Korea's defense budget. Therefore, the pledges give priority on the anti-communism point in order to secure the US approval. And then at the time, the US gave positive reaction because under the Kennedy administration, actually the US more interested in his Cold War policy than concerned about the US commitment to democracy in South Korea. And then the US, under the Kennedy government, sent a message to the US-Korea Friendship and Cooperation Confirmation and gave approval to Park's administrative democracy. Park's administrative democracy, or Koreanized democracy, was the public rationale for his military-style administration, which he claimed was necessary to root out the past and to construct a new generation of national leadership comprising former military officers, technical engineers, and other experts with professional qualifications. He said that this administrative democracy intended to meet Korea's social and political reality and not to introduce unworkable West European democracy. Park also said that the fundamental problem of Korean society under the Chang government had been its failure to eradicate three major evils: pro-communism and anti-state opportunism, the mushrooming of political parties and newspapers, both of which he considered irresponsible and corrupt, and also the indiscriminate acceptance of foreign culture. Park then also said that strong leadership in an administrative democracy was deemed by Park to be essential to maintaining control as he went about the task of national reconstruction. He also sees this administrative democracy as a new beginning to end Korea's slavist mentality towards strong foreign countries. Park also introduced the idea of bottom-up democracy, where he basically says that democracy that we must aim to build is not one imposed from above, but one that must emerge from below. Park demanded the elimination of the established conservative power base which what had been built on privilege, status, class, and wealth as a precondition to establishing Koreanizing democracy. And he also argued that the construction of non-elitist and bottom-up democracy in Korea must be achieved over time so that his military junta could implant democratic factors in stages, which would then be developed among the general public as far as possible. Park's technocracy. In addition to pursuing reform at the local level, reform of the bureaucracy continued to be a top priority for the military junta. Thus, the recruitment of new elite officers to the junta government laid the foundation of Park's strong state. He was restructuring the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, or MCI, and Economic Planning Board, or EPB. The newly formed Park technocracy consisted of two new generation elite groups: technocrats and a blend of former military generals, corporate managers, and professional administrators. As a whole, these groups displayed three distinct characteristics. First, they were highly qualified professionals with a strong sense of self-discipline and a focus on efficiency and achieving goals. Second, they had a clear understanding of the essential difference between their own bureaucratic managerial power and that of their political masters who held ultimate governing power. And third, they had no illusions about Park's national development agenda. This is not to say that Park's technocracy was not criticized for disturbing Korea's value system and for instilling a shortcut mentality in the minds of Korean people, the bureaucracy, and the business community. Another source of criticism was the application of familism and regionalism in Park's technocracy. Guided capitalism and the 5-year program. Guided capitalism was a system of economic management designed to create an economic order that would guarantee the equalization of income and public benefit from the economy. Park saw the government's role in the course of national development as that of an industry manager or a guardian so that equal opportunities for all can be guaranteed by free competition. Thus, for example, Park introduced this guided capitalism through the first 5-year economic development plan, which, according to Park, was designed to ensure that the activities of leading businessmen or chaebol did not betray so-called democratic principle. The first 5-year plan was a most important blueprint for the initial phase of Park's guided capitalism, directing the workings of the Park's administration, especially in its dealing with owner-managers of leading business groups, the chaebol. Park also established a Confucian military-style master-student relationship between the government and the business community. Moreover, the first 5-year program provided Park with the public policy required to impose what he termed as administrative controls over every business group and simultaneously shielded him from any unwanted challenges from the business community. Park's guided capitalism offered extensive measures of industry support such as foreign loan guarantees, financial subsidies, and fixed wage system. And also, the government controls over key mechanism by convicting business leaders, nationalizing the 5 major banks, and declaring currency reform was very essential in Park's guided capitalism. However, finally, Park succeeded in establishing state controls over the banks. The Korean word chaebol means business family or monopoly, and the Korean chaebol structure refers to business conglomerate structures that originated in South Korea in 1960s, creating global multinational with huge international operations. The example of this chaebol was like Samsung, LG, Hyundai, and many more. This chaebol was playing a huge role in Korea's development under Park's regime. One of the form of Park's administrative controls was also arresting illicit profiteers. At the time, 3 days after their release from nearly 2 months detention, Park commissioned 13 illicit profiteers to establish the Promotional Committee for Economy Reconstruction, or PCER, the forerunner of the Federation of Korean Industries. The 13 members of the PCER aimed to implement a program of industry development by drawing up a plan for 6 key industries: cement, synthetic fiber, electricity, fertilizer, iron, and oil refinery. The consequences of challenging or resisting the state's first 5-year plan were severe, whether in terms of their business or their personal safety. This is then called surgical operation, which Park imposed on many prominent people, especially leading chaebol, who were punished severely, in Park's word, in the name of the nation. Here, Parks also have low tolerance towards business leaders, especially in the state's planning and implementation of industry development. As a result, no business leaders, including CHUNG, dared to resist directly the directives that emanated from the SCNR's industry planning committees. Leadership challenge. On 27 December 1962, Park announced that the transfer of power to an elected civilian government would take place in August 1963, and that presidential and National Assembly elections would be held in April and May 1963 respectively. However, at the time, Park already intended to dominate any future civilian government. He was also planning to retire from the military to run for the presidency. However, at this stage, Park had come up against many obstacles, both from internally and externally. Internally, he was caught up in the power struggle within the military junta between the progressive young colonel led by Kim Jong-il, then head of the and moderate senior members of the SCNR. Externally, Park struggled with pressure from the U.S. policy advisor to restore civilian government and to comply with changing U.S. aid policy. Dependence on U.S. aid. On March 16, 1963, Park announced a decree proposing a national referendum to extend the military government's term by an extra 4 years. Then, the U.S. was shocked, and through Berger, the U.S. introduced the U.S. anti-Park strategy that was designed to force Park not to break his pledges to hold elections and restore civil government. The anti-Park strategy had primarily emerged out of the Kennedy administration's aim to redirect U.S. aid to economic development assistance focused on long-term economic, political, and social development and away from military development. At the time, Park also feared that a reduction in U.S. aid and felt U.S. pressure on him to effect a rapid return to civilian rule and settlement with Japan, when the U.S. invited him to visit President Kennedy the following month. At the time, the U.S. ambassador, Berger, played a huge role in this anti-flunkism rhetoric in presidential campaign. In contrast to his own position as military junta leader, Park characterized the opposition stance during the election campaign as pre-modern, feudalistic, and flunkist in the face of foreign powers. He proposed to introduce a new, uniquely Korean way and a new political leadership system opposed to Western-style democracy with a total transfer of political leadership from the old privileged class to the masses. With this rhetoric, Park launched his presidential election campaign, which was focused primarily on Korea's fundamental problem, national dependence on the US and flunkism. To support his bid to win the presidency, Park introduced a new concept of democracy in September 1963, termed nationalistic democracy, or Koreanized democracy. And according to him, the future of Korea had to be built on two priorities: Korea first and economy first. Park's terminology of nationalistic democracy symbolized the primacy of national independence and sovereignty over foreign dominance and interference. Park's statement immediately stirred his opposition, especially Yoon, former president and leader of the Civil Rule Party, who represented one of the most conservative political groups in contemporary Korean politics, and he declared that Park's democracy was impure, and Park's arguing that Yoon's was hypocritical, because according to Yoon, Park's did not represent the principles of genuine liberal democracy. A notable feature of this dispute was the public exposure of Park's Communist Part. Park has a past that are associated with the communist. And one of the 7 presidential candidates, Ho, the leader of the People's Party, exposed the Democratic Republican Party links with a mysterious man known as Hwang X from North Korea. Ho argued that the DRP's pre-arranged organization with a cell structure framework known as CHUNG had been prepared by Hwang. However, on October 10, just 5 days before the election, Park revealed that Hwang was an old friend of his elder brother, Sang-hui, who had been executed by police for his role in a communist riot in October 1946. He also revealed that Hwang's secret mission to Seoul had been to propose a political negotiation between South and North Korea. And in order to rid himself of this stigma, Park approved Hwang's execution. However, in October 1963, Park won the president election. Despite widely noted bribery, election fraud, and irregularities, the president election was generally seen as fair. And this confirmed the achievement of Park's most important priorities in his 2-year military junta leadership, to establish his political legitimacy and to obtain US support. This is the end of the presentation, and this is the reference of the book that I use. Thank you so much.